Hi, I'm Dr. Maura Hurden-Fellner, and this is the first in a series of 5 lectures covering some of the basics of the Catholic faith in light of the concept of mercy. These lectures were first presented at St. Agnes Parish in Lake Placid, New York, and they were presented during the Jubilee year of mercy declared by Pope Francis. The Pope reminds us in his papal bull, Misericordia Vultus, that, quote, mercy is the very foundation of the Church's life, end quote. In fact, he points out that the concept of mercy is at the very core of every aspect of our faith. He says, quote, mercy, the word reveals the very mystery of the Most Holy Trinity. Mercy, the ultimate and supreme act by which God comes to meet us. Mercy, the fundamental law that dwells in the heart of every person who looks sincerely into the eyes of his brothers and sisters on the path of life. Mercy, the bridge that connects God and man, opening our hearts to the hope of being loved in spite of our sinfulness. End quote. But Francis also reminds us that the world we live in has a problem with mercy. He quotes from John Paul II's encyclical on mercy, Dives in Misericordia, which says, quote, the present-day mentality, more perhaps than that of people in the past, seems opposed to a God of mercy, and in fact tends to exclude from life and to remove from the human heart the very idea of mercy. The word and the concept of mercy seem to cause uneasiness in man, who, thanks to the enormous development of science and technology, never before known in history, has become the master of the earth and has subdued and dominated it. This dominion over the earth, sometimes understood in a one-sided and superficial way, seems to have no room for mercy, end quote. Our popular culture seems opposed to a God of mercy in many ways. In fact, many of its assumptions about reality in general are, from a Catholic perspective, dangerously false. These assumptions surround us. They're in the very air we breathe, and they make it harder than ever to live out our Christian faith. So, we're going to do 2 things in the next 5 lectures. First, we're going to explore some of the basic truths of our faith in light of the concept of mercy. But second, we're also going to challenge some of popular culture's dangerously false assumptions about the human condition and the way that the world works in light of the truths given us by Christ through his Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. Hopefully, it'll all come together in a way that deepens our insights and strengthens our faith so that we are better prepared to be the merciful and heroic witnesses that Christ calls us to be. The first lecture is called, What is Truth? And Will the Truth Set You Free? The Reality of God's Mercy. The patron saint of divine mercy is Saint Faustina Kowalska, and her diary is subtitled Divine Mercy in My Soul. It describes her mystical experiences with Jesus, the Lord of Mercy. You might be familiar with the painting of Jesus as he appeared in a vision to St. Faustina. It's the one with the rays coming from his hands. But do you know the motto that's written on the bottom of it? It says, "Jesus, I trust in you. Jesus, I trust in you." That's the whole ball game, isn't it? And that's salvation. Trust in Jesus, the God of divine mercy. We're to spend our time on this earth developing a relationship with Jesus Christ through the sacraments, prayer, and service to our fellow man, the kind of relationship that allows us to give ourselves to him without reserve, to trust him with all that we are, all that we have, all that we love, even the people we love. If we can do that, we can be united with him in glory for all eternity. Trust in Jesus. That's the key. But now wait a minute. If I'm going to trust someone, I must first believe that they're telling me the truth, right? I mean, you're not going to trust all that you have and are to someone who may or may not be telling you the truth. So here's the question. Do we believe that Jesus Christ and the church that he founded are indeed telling us the truth? There are some fundamental popular assumptions about the nature of truth and how truth is obtained that make it very difficult for people in our world to believe in the reality of God's mercy, much less trust him. In this lecture, we're going to expose and challenge a couple of the most important of those assumptions. We're going to ask, 1, how is true knowledge obtained? 2, what is the nature of truth? And then we're going to bring these somewhat abstract notions down to earth and show how they are very important to our everyday lives by asking a third question. What does truth have to do with freedom and mercy? So let's start with number 1. How is true knowledge, not just opinion, but knowledge that you can count on, obtained? I'm going to begin by asking you a question. What's the sum of 2 plus 2? 4, right? Okay. Now, how many of you have ever had a conversation that went something like this? You say 2 plus 2 equals 4. Your friend says, well, I respect your right to believe that 2 plus 2 equals 4, but I believe that 2 plus 2 equals 5. And you should respect my right to my personal beliefs. Just drop the matter. I mean, what's true for you is not necessarily true for me, but that's okay, because whatever works for you is okay. That's absurd, right? I mean, 2 plus 2 equals 4. That's not just true for me. That's true for everyone. That's reality. Okay. Now, how many of you have ever had a conversation about a religious topic that has followed a similar pattern? All of us, right? I mean, in fact, we're told that this is the only sort of conversation that we can have about religious ideas. Our popular culture says we must respect the fact that religious ideas are really just a matter of personal opinion, and there is no way to justify the notion that some religious ideas are true and some are in error. But if I say God exists for me, but he may not exist for you, what kind of truth is that? I mean, if he only exists for me and he doesn't exist for you, does he exist anywhere outside of my imagination? And how am I going to trust my very being, everything I am, everything I have, to a figment of someone's imagination. Is it any wonder that we have difficulty practicing our faith? And yet, Jesus tells Pontius Pilate in John 18:37, and I quote, "For this I was born, and for this I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." End quote. So what's the deal? Can I trust Jesus or not? Well, let's go back and look at the two conversations again, the one about math and the one about God, and compare them. How do we know that we're on solid ground when we say that 2 plus 2 equals 4? I can test it. I can experience it for myself. I can take 2 objects over here and 2 objects over here. I can smush them together, count them up, voila, you have 4, right? Well, most of us can't provide a physical demonstration of God's existence. And I say most because every once in a while God makes a splash in human history with a miracle, but most people don't claim to have personally experienced miracles. So, is that it? We can't know religious ideas to be true or false? No. Here's my first challenge to a pervasive, nearly universally held assumption in popular culture that is absolutely 100% undeniably false. Popular culture says true knowledge can only be obtained by means of demonstrable, repeatable physical experiments. In other words, the natural sciences. Because one cannot test religious ideas in this way, there is no way to know if they are true. But that's not so. Let me ask you another question. Who was the first president of the United States? George Washington, right? And how do you know that? Are you old enough to have met him? Experienced him personally? Did you hear his voice, shake his hand? No, of course not. You did not find out about George Washington through a physical demonstration of George Washington's existence. You found out by reading a book or listening to a teacher. You learned this truth about the first president, a truth that you can count on to be true for everyone, by listening to the testimony of trustworthy witnesses, passed down in both written and oral tradition. And that's not all. How do you know the date of your birth? How do you know that there is a place called Kuala Lumpur? How do you know that whales are mammals? How do you know your spouse loves you? Think about all the things that we know to be true as we go through the day. Even if the subject is something that could be verified through scientific methods, we don't perform every experiment ourselves personally. I mean, imagine where medical science would be if each new generation of doctors had to reinvent penicillin. The vast majority of our true knowledge comes to us not from our use of science, but from the testimony of trustworthy witnesses. Every time a student opens a textbook, whether it's history, biology, physics, or art appreciation, they are gaining true knowledge from the testimony of trustworthy witnesses. And that's how we know about Jesus, the testimony of trustworthy witnesses. But you may be thinking, even if I can't test the effectiveness of, say, antibiotics myself, someone did. Someone somewhere at some point in time had a physical demonstration of their effectiveness. Okay. How do we know that Christ is truly God? He rose from the dead. He gave us a sensible, historical demonstration of his power over death. There were multiple witnesses to this event over the course of 40 days. In his book, Jesus of Nazareth, Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI says, quote, "For it is of the very essence of biblical faith to be about real historical events. It does not tell stories symbolizing supra-historical truths, but is based on history that took place here on this earth." End quote. The 73 documents that comprise the compendium that we call the Bible have been scrutinized every which way for many centuries, with far more care than most university textbooks. In fact, there's more reason to believe in the reality of Christ than there is to believe that Julius Caesar plunged himself and his followers into civil war by crossing the Rubicon River in 49 BC. There is corroborating testimony from historical sources outside of the books of the New Testament, archaeological evidence supporting the accuracy of details described in the New Testament, and a host of reasons to believe in the good character of the witnesses themselves, not the least of which is the fact that many of them were martyred. I can't go into all of the specific factors that verify the historicity of the New Testament and the Christian faith right now, but if you'd like a nice summary that gives you a start, and it provides additional book titles that you can look up, you can check out a short article on the Catholic Answers magazine website. It's called Are the Gospels Myth? And it's written by Carl Olson. Or, actually, a book that I've read recently that I really like a lot is called The Case for Jesus, written by Dr. Brant Pitre, and his last name is spelled P-I-T-R-E. That's The Case for Jesus. But now, right now, I'd just like to bring home the point that most of the true knowledge we have about any topic is acquired by means of trustworthy testimony. And that is what we have in Scripture and sacred tradition. Now that we've said a little bit about how true knowledge is obtained, let's take up the second question on our agenda and explore a couple of fundamental points about the nature of truth. Generally speaking, there are two types of truth: objective and subjective. The moral and religious truths taught to us by Jesus Christ through the Catholic Church are what we call objective truths. But our popular culture would have us believe that they are subjective truths. This is one of the most dangerous, erroneous assumptions facing the world today. Because if we buy into this assumption, we will lose all of our civil liberties. I'm not exaggerating. I mean exactly what I say. It's guaranteed. Pope St. John Paul II, Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, and our current Pope Francis have each, in their own way, warned about the disasters awaiting us if we can't get this fundamental point right. And you'll see why shortly. I'll explain. But first, we have to be clear about the meaning of the terms subjective and objective. So, we can look at their connection later on with freedom, in other words, civil liberties, and mercy. So let me talk about objective versus subjective truth first. What is subjective truth? Basically, subjective truth is perception or opinion. We call it subjective because it tells us a truth about the subject, the one who perceives and expresses the opinion, rather than the truth about the object, the thing that the subject is talking about. I'm going to give you a couple of examples that are outside of the realm of moral debates, just so we can get this down, and then we'll go back to the moral and religious subjects. So here we go. If I say, Pink is the greatest color in the world. I'm the subject. Pink is the object. I'm giving you an opinion that tells you something true about me, the subject, specifically about my perceptions. I like pink. But it doesn't really tell you anything at all about the object, the color pink itself. Someone else could just as legitimately say, pink is the ugliest color in the world. They would also be expressing a truth about themselves. They dislike pink. The truths that we expressed were not about the color. They were about the perceptions of the people who were looking at the color. These truths are subjective truths. And what is subjectively true can legitimately be said to be true for me, but not necessarily true for you. If, on the other hand, I say pink paint is a mixture of red and white pigments, and for those of you who may not have studied color wheels, it really is, I'm not telling you about my perceptions. Rather, I'm telling you a truth about the color itself, the object of my speech. The statement, pink paint is a mixture of red and white pigments, is objectively true because it speaks of a truth that is inherent or built into the object, the color pink, and it's independent of my personal perceptions of it. I could say pink paint is a mixture of blue and yellow pigments, but I'd be wrong. For those of you who don't know, mixing blue and yellow makes green. No amount of desire or blindly willed belief on my part would change that objective fact. Objective truths are universal. They're true for everyone, regardless of personal perceptions, because they're inherent or built into the thing perceived, whether I happen to see it that way or not. Now let's go on to the third question for the evening. What does truth have to do with freedom and mercy? We'll take a look at freedom first. If you were to force me to say that I liked pink when I did not, you would be infringing on my legitimate right to self-expression. I have the right to express my personal preferences, my subjective truth. If, however, you were to hear me say that, quote, pink is a mixture of blue and yellow, you'd be well within your rights, and mine, by the way, to correct my mistake. In fact, you'd be doing me a favor, because acting on my mistaken theory will never produce the results that I desire. I can't get pink from mixing blue and yellow, and it doesn't matter how much I might want to or how firmly I believe that I can. The correction of an objective falsehood is never an infringement on freedom. In fact, real freedom depends upon acknowledging and working with objective truths. Think about it. One of the objective truths about the human condition is that it's prone to addiction. If I ignore that truth and exercise my freedom of choice to drink too much alcohol or take narcotics, I'll become enslaved to an addiction. My free choice will actually have enslaved me. It's inevitable, even if I don't think it can happen. In fact, any choice that I make that works against the objective truths about what my body and spirit need to be healthy diminishes my freedom. If I indulge in gluttony, I diminish my physical health and so am less free to participate in physical activities. I become a prisoner within my own body. I also become enslaved to my desires, so that I might no longer have the willpower to say no to food. I might start compulsively binge eating. My overeating actually begins to control me. If I tell lies, I undermine my relationships and my own ability to trust people, and I become emotionally and psychologically incarcerated within all the precautions that I have to take to make sure, first of all, that no one catches on to my lies, and secondly, that no one's taking advantage of me because I can't trust people anymore. Moral truths are objective. They are rooted in the realities of the human design and condition and are independent of personal perceptions. Truly, truly, I say to you, anyone who sins is a slave to sin. And that's from John 8:34. Philosophers warn us not to confuse freedom with license. License is the permission to do whatever you want without any interference from anyone or anything. Freedom is more than that. Freedom involves the ability to choose, for sure, but to maintain and grow in a state of freedom, we must make choices that are in harmony with the objective truths about our own health and well-being. Healthy, happy, balanced people are much freer than sick, depressed, unbalanced people. And this is true not only for individuals, but for whole societies. If, for example, we lived in a society that allowed murder, we would have to take measures to protect ourselves, like putting bars on our windows, avoiding certain places and going out at certain times, and treating our neighbors with suspicion. We would not be able to move around freely. We'd be incarcerated by all our protective precautions. Freedom, and any lasting happiness for that matter, depends upon our making the right choices. And the right choices depend upon our understanding of certain objective truths about the entire reality, the physical and spiritual reality of the human condition. Real freedom is the right and ability to choose the good. Moral laws are not arbitrary rules laid down by a power-crazed God, or church for that matter, that wants to spoil our fun. Moral laws are instructions in how to make the kinds of choices that will support the objective truths about the human condition, and so make us free, happy, and healthy in this life as well as the next. This is why the church also teaches that there is no mercy without truth. Let me repeat that. There is no mercy without truth. Standing by silently while the people we love put themselves in harm's way by habitually committing serious sins, or worse yet, pretending that their behavior that we know to be disordered is actually good, and that those who openly and unapologetically engage in these behaviors are to be celebrated for their courage, is the opposite of mercy. We can neither avoid the inevitable dangers of, nor receive forgiveness and healing from, crimes that we don't admit to. But we will experience the inevitable, very bad consequences of those crimes. For example, our society has accepted abortion as a sort of backup to failed birth control. Whole segments of society celebrate a woman's right to choose. especially in the case of rape and incest, because this is supposed to be the compassionate, merciful alternative to living with the evidence of the crime for 9 months. But the objective truth of the matter is that the killing of an innocent human life is evil. And, in addition to the injustice done to the unborn child, there will inevitably be certain horrible consequences for the mother and society in general when this evil is permitted. The emotional and psychological consequences for the mother are evidenced by the growing number of support initiatives such as Rachel's Vineyard, designed to help women heal from the anger, self-loathing, and emotional scarring of abortions that they have had. There is, in fact, a whole new mental disorder called post-abortion syndrome. You can go online and read the thoughts of women who have had abortions to get a sense for what's going on. The following is a painful excerpt from a letter it was published online by prolifeinfo.ie, and it was written by a young woman who got drunk, had sex, became pregnant with twins, and decided to abort them. And here's what she says. I phoned my friend to collect me, but she sounded reluctant. So I made my own way back to her flat. She had cooked scones and wanted to celebrate. She didn't know I felt terrible. I felt frightened and empty. Soon I felt she wanted me to leave. I went to stay with another friend who was very nice to me. This made me feel worse. The whole day long I could only see twins in prams all around. There seemed to be an unusually high number where we lived. In a daze, very lonely and isolated, I wanted the comfort and security of home, but I was still frightened of complications and bleeding. Back home, I fell into a routine of watching TV, getting up late, looking forward to going to bed. I didn't look after myself, my hygiene. I hate myself. I thought my lifestyle was worth killing for. Now I see I have destroyed the chance I had of growing in love for my children. They would have enriched my life and changed it completely. I killed my maternal instinct, and now I am alone, still searching for peace and stability. My sister tries to talk to me, but I get emotional, and I feel guilty about her concern when she doesn't know about the abortion. I'm terrorizing my parents by my aloofness and isolation. It's the only way I can protect myself from feelings. That's what happens to the mother. And we haven't even begun to speak of the increased objectification of women and babies in our society, the disassociation of fathers from their children, and the development of attitudes toward human life that justify euthanasia and infanticide. Moral truths are objective, and the consequences of ignoring them are inevitably self-destructive. We are all guilty of sin. We all struggle against it. And we all rely on the merciful honesty of the people we love to help us to overcome it. But where do these moral truths come from, you might ask? As Catholics, we draw from both revelation and traditionally something called natural law to determine what these truths are. The term natural law is often misunderstood, and we don't have time to go into a lot of detail about it right now, but briefly, natural law has nothing to do with the law of the jungle, or whether or not you can find certain behaviors in the animal kingdom, or what we are merely accustomed to. It has nothing to do with any of that. Rather, natural law refers to principles derived from rational observations about the objective truths of the human condition. human nature and what it needs to flourish. They have the force of law because they demand our obedience if we want to be healthy and happy. The concept originated with the ancient Greeks. Evidence of similar studies can be found in numerous moral codes of conduct within other religious systems, such as Buddhism's 5 precepts or Hinduism's 10 disciplines. The Greek concept was developed by Thomas Aquinas and other great Christian thinkers in light of Christian revelation about the origin, nature, and final destiny of humanity. Until recently, Greek natural law, informed by Christian revelation, has served as the foundation of Western civil law. Now, here's an important point. While natural law as a concept began prior to Christianity, it was developed in the West specifically with reference to the truths about God, humanity, and the universe that were revealed to us by Jesus Christ. Revelation is, for example, where we get the idea that the life of every human being on the planet, regardless of race, religion, social standing, physical ability, or any other attribute, is to be regarded as sacred, equally sacred to every other human being on the planet. This idea, drawn specifically from a Christian reading of the first chapters of Genesis, has had an incredible impact on the world, so that now arguing for someone's equal rights is a commonplace. Even people who are not Christian or are hostile to Christianity lay claim to the equality of the human person. But based on what? On the face of it, we're not equal at all. I mean, some of us are smart and some are slow. Some are beautiful and some are homely. Some are rich, some are poor, some are great athletes, some are physically disabled. Some are kind and some are cruel. In what way exactly are we all equal? The Christian answer to that question is that we are all equally children of God, equally loved by Him, equally created in His image, and I say created, your very being is in His image, and equally called by God to share in the divine life. The Christian answer to this question is the only answer to this question. If the Christian God is not objectively true, humanity loses its claim to universal sacred dignity. Historically, it has been our ability to appeal to the higher, objectively true principles of natural law informed by Christian revelation that has allowed us to overturn unjust civil laws, such as Jim Crow laws of the South, to recognize the objective evil of regimes, such as Hitler's Germany, and to insist that there are such things as universal, inalienable human rights. Now, here's an example of a famous appeal to the objective truths of natural law given by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King received a PhD in systematic theology from Boston University, and he drew from this education when writing a letter from a Birmingham jail where he was imprisoned for participation in a nonviolent protest against segregation. Here's an excerpt. He says, "You express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws. This is certainly a legitimate concern. Since we so diligently urge people to obey the Supreme Court's decision of 1954 outlawing segregation in the public schools, it is rather strange and paradoxical to find us consciously breaking laws. One may well ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer is found in the fact that there are two types of laws. There are just laws, and there are unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that, quote, an unjust law is no law at all. And that was an end quote from St. Augustine, going back to Martin Luther King Jr. Now, what is the difference between the two? How does one determine when a law is just or unjust? A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law, or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. To put it in the terms of St. Thomas Aquinas, an unjust law is a human law that is not rooted in eternal and natural law. Any law that uplifts human personality is just. Any law that degrades human personality is unjust. All segregation statutes are unjust because segregation distorts the soul and damages the personality. And then he goes on to explain how. Dr. King could argue against a law of which the vast majority of the voting public approved because he could appeal to a universal, objectively true set of principles called natural law. Recently, however, popular thought on the matter has been overwhelmed by the pervasive notion that all moral and religious truths are subjective. From the existence of God, to the realm of sexual ethics and preferences, to whether or not a baby residing in his mother's womb deserves to be called a human person. Popular culture determines what is good by simply deferring to that which is preferred. It scoffs at natural law and revelation, claiming that they interfere with the freedom to do as we please. We have, in the name of freedom, emancipated ourselves from the very idea that there are objective truths about God, humanity, and the universe. In other words, we have emancipated ourselves from the very foundation of all of our human rights. If there are no objective, universal, moral truths, then what do we use for the basis of our civil law? I'll tell you what we use. We use the subjective preference of the most powerful party. Now, power can be exerted in many ways: politically, economically, physically, emotionally. Americans usually appeal to the power of the majority vote. But no matter what form the rule of power takes, it's still a rule of power and not principle. It is a tyranny. We live in dangerous times. Times when truth is determined by polls, majority votes, and pressure exerted by special interest groups rather than reason. As Christians, we're called to witness to truth, objective truth. We're called to live the reality that God exists and that He is merciful, that in His mercy, He has revealed Himself to us, and in doing so, He has revealed the truth, the objective truth about us to ourselves. That we have been given the sacred dignity of having been made in His image. That we flourish when we abide by the laws of love, self-discipline, and self-sacrifice. And that we are called to eternal glory. The first generations of Christians lived by these truths, and they changed the world. They eliminated the practice of infanticide, which was common in the Roman Empire, for example. They defied the norms of most ancient cultures by calling upon husbands to be chaste and faithful to their wives, unheard of. They set up hospitals and charitable organizations and imbued Western culture and law with assumptions about the equal and sacred dignity of all persons that are now so taken for granted that we mistake them for mere common sense. They're not. If we can acknowledge the objective truths of God's merciful revelation and truly and courageously live by it, then we will have hope, even when light is elusive. Joy, even in the midst of tragedy. And we will change the world just as surely as Mother Teresa changed the lives of the people in Calcutta and countless numbers of people from every nation who were touched by her witness. God, in his mercy, has given us the truth about himself, humanity, and the world. And the truth will set you free. This concludes Lecture 1 of our 5-part series on the Catholic Faith and Mercy. Join me for Lecture 2, titled, Why is Being Good Not Good Enough? The Need for God's Mercy.